My parents cut me off. My brother was their golden child. I built my success alone, but now that he's failed, they suddenly need me? Not anymore. I was never the favorite. No matter how hard I tried, no matter what I did, it was always about him, my older brother, Ryan. The golden child. The one who could do no wrong. The one our parents worshipped. I got straight A's. That's nice, but Ryan made the football team. I won a scholarship. Good, but Ryan got into Dad's alma mater. I started my own business. A waste of time. Ryan's corporate job was real success. And when I refused to follow the same path, they cut me off. If you won't do something respectable, don't expect our support. Their words still echoed in my head. I left home with nothing. No money. No contacts. No family. Ryan had everything. I had no one. But life has a funny way of turning the tables. Because now, I own a multi-million-dollar company. And Ryan? He just lost his job. And our parents? They're begging me to hire him. I was in my office, reviewing quarterly reports, when my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, probably another investor inquiry. But something in my gut told me to answer. Hello? Silence. Then. Hey, it's Mom. I froze. It had been years since I'd heard her voice. Years since she and Dad had told me I was a disappointment for not following that family path. And now she was calling me? I leaned back in my chair, forcing my voice to stay neutral. Didn't expect to hear from you. A nervous chuckle. I know. It's been too long. How have you been? I smirked. Now you care? Busy, I said simply. Running a company takes time. A pause. Then a sigh. That's actually why I called. I already knew where this was going. Ryan lost his job, she said, voice heavy with regret. The company went under. He's struggling. I stayed silent. He's got a family to support, honey. It's been really hard on him. My grip tightened on the phone. So let me guess, I said coolly. You want me to hire him? Another pause. You're successful now. You can afford to help. I laughed. A cold, sharp sound. You mean, now that I don't need anything from you, you suddenly remember I exist? That's not fair, she protested. I scoffed. No, what wasn't fair was being treated like an outsider in my own family. What wasn't fair was you cutting me off when I needed you most. I could hear the tension in her breath. Honey, please. He's your brother. I clenched my jaw. Years ago, I would have done anything for their approval. Now, I held all the power. And they knew it. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch between us. For years, I had been the one begging for their approval. Begging for even a fraction of the support Ryan had always gotten. Now, they were the ones begging me. Honey, please, my mother's voice cracked. Just talk to him. I smirked. Talk to him? Like the way he talked to me when he told me my business was a joke. Like the way Dad talked to me when he said I'd come crawling back. Silence. She knew I was right. But old habits die hard. That was a long time ago, she tried, things are different now. I let out a slow breath, fingers tapping against my desk. No, Mom. The only thing that's different is that now, I'm successful. Now, you suddenly care. Now, you need me. Her voice softened. Manipulative. Sweetheart, we're still family. That word. Family. It used to mean something. Now, it just felt like a convenient excuse. I checked my watch. If Ryan wants a job, he can come ask me himself. Like a man. She hesitated. I could hear the unspoken truth in her silence. Ryan was too ashamed. The golden child. The one who had always been better than me. He couldn't face the fact that now, I was the one in control. I smirked. That's what I thought. Then, without another word, I hung up. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one chasing them. They were chasing me. I didn't expect Ryan to call. He was too proud. Too entitled. Too used to being the one on top. So when my phone buzzed 2 days later, and I saw his name flash across the screen, I nearly laughed. The golden child had finally fallen. I let it ring twice before answering. Well, I said smoothly. To what do I owe the pleasure? A heavy sigh. Cut the crap, he muttered. Mom said you'd help me. I raised an eyebrow. Funny. I don't remember saying that. Silence. Then, his voice tighter, come on, man. I know we've had our issues, but this is serious. I need a job. I leaned back, savoring the moment. And I needed a family once. Didn't seem to matter back then. Another long pause. Then, a sound I never thought I'd hear from Ryan. Defeat. Look, he said, his voice lower now, almost forced. I was wrong about you. About the business. I get it. But my wife is pregnant. I have a mortgage. His voice faltered. I just need a chance. I exhaled slowly. For a second, just a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered. The way he used to laugh when my parents dismissed me. The way he said, you'll come crawling back, like it was inevitable. The way I had to build everything alone, while he had everything handed to him. And now, he wanted my help? No. I wasn't that kid anymore. I wasn't the forgotten one, the second choice, the backup plan. Now, I was the one calling the shots. You want a job? I said finally. Come to my office tomorrow. 8 a.m. sharp. I could practically hear his pride crumbling. Yeah. Okay. I smirked. Oh, and Ryan? What? If you're even a minute late, don't bother showing up. Then I hung up. Because this time, he needed me more than I would ever need him. 8 a.m. came. Then 8:01. Then 8:05. I leaned back in my chair, checking the time, already smirking. Ryan was late. Of course, he was. He had spent his entire life being the exception. The one who got away with everything. The one our parents made excuses for. But in my world, there were no excuses. At 8:07, my office door finally creaked open. Ryan stepped in, looking nothing like the brother I grew up with. His designer suits. Gone. That smug, effortless confidence. Shattered. For the first time in his life, he looked lost. I glanced at my watch. You're late. He sighed. Come on, man. I said 8 o'clock. You're 7 minutes late. Ryan tensed. It's 7 minutes, not a big deal. I tilted my head. And that's why you're sitting here asking me for a job. His jaw clenched. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. He did. Slowly. I could tell it was killing him, to be in my office, at my mercy. To be the one who had to prove himself for once. And I enjoyed every second of it. You want a job? I asked, folding my hands. Yes, he muttered. I smirked. What exactly can you offer my company? He shifted. I worked in corporate finance for years. I know how to manage a team, handle clients, work under pressure. I held up a hand. So you're good at following orders? He stiffened. That's not what I meant. But that's what it is. I leaned forward. Because here's the thing, Ryan, you're not walking in as a senior executive. You're not getting a cushy office with a view. If you work here, you start at the bottom. No favors. No shortcuts. Just hard work. His face darkened. Are you serious? Dead serious. Silence. He exhaled sharply. What's the position? I smiled. Junior associate. Ryan's eyes flashed. You want me to work under some kid fresh out of college? I shrugged. It's what happens when you start over. He shook his head, disbelief in his voice. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. I was. For the first time, he had to fight for something. For the first time, he had to prove himself. For the first time, he was the one on the outside. And me? I was the one who decided whether to let him in. Your choice, I said, leaning back. Take it or leave it. Ryan stared at me. And I could see the war inside him, his ego fighting his desperation. Then, after what felt like forever. Fine. I smirked. Good. Then I slid the contract across the desk. Because for the first time in our lives, he was working for me. Ryan sat across from me, staring at the contract like it was a prison sentence. He had no other options. And we both knew it. I leaned back, watching him hesitate. This was new for him. He wasn't used to begging. He wasn't used to being the one who had to prove himself. He was used to winning. But today? He was losing. And I wasn't going to let him forget that. Monday morning, I arrived at the office early. Ryan was already there. He stood by the reception desk, stiff and uncomfortable, dressed in a suit that was too expensive for an entry-level position. He looked out of place. You're early, I said casually, stopping beside him. He shoved his hands into his pockets. Figured it wouldn't look good if I showed up late again. Smart, I said. Maybe you can be trained after all. His jaw clenched. I smirked. Follow me. I walked him through the office, introducing him to his new colleagues, most of them younger, most of them below the level he was used to. I could see it eating him alive. Then, we reached his desk. A small, cramped cubicle. No office. No view. No special treatment. This is where you'll be working, I said simply. Ryan stared at it. You're kidding. Did I laugh? His throat bobbed. This isn't corporate finance, I continued. This is my company. We built this from nothing. We work as a team. You're here to learn, not to boss people around. His hands curled into fists. I know how to do my job. I raised an eyebrow. Do you? Because last I checked, you lost it. His face reddened. I let him sit with that. Then I leaned in, voice lower. You're not the golden child here, Ryan. You're just another employee. You don't get favors. You don't get shortcuts. If you want to stay, you earn your place. He didn't argue. Because for the first time in his life, he couldn't. I spent the next few weeks watching. Watching as Ryan struggled with the reality of his new position. He wasn't used to answering to people. Now, he had a supervisor half his age. He wasn't used to starting over. Now, he had to ask for help. He wasn't used to being less than perfect. Now, he was just another employee. And I could see the humiliation in his eyes every time someone treated him like one. But here's what surprised me. He didn't quit. Not after the first week. Not after his supervisor corrected his work. Not even after an intern asked him to grab coffee. Instead, he worked. He shut his mouth. He showed up early. He learned. And slowly, he started changing. Maybe this was the first time in his life he had ever been humbled. And I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Because part of me, I wanted him to fail. I wanted him to quit. To walk out. To prove that he was exactly who I thought he was, someone who only thrived when things were easy. But another part of me, the part that had once wanted a brother, it wondered. Could people really change? And more importantly, would I ever let him? Weeks passed. Ryan hadn't quit. That should have been enough to impress me. But it wasn't. Because I was still waiting for him to fail. To prove that he hadn't really changed. To prove that he was still the same spoiled, entitled golden child who had always been handed everything. But instead, he kept going. And that pissed me off more than if he had just walked out. Because if he wasn't the same man I remembered, then maybe I wasn't as over the past as I thought. One morning, I walked into the office early, coffee in hand. The place was quiet, except for a single cubicle light still on. I knew who it was before I even looked. Ryan. Sitting at his desk, sleeves rolled up, papers spread in front of him, actually working. I leaned against the cubicle. Didn't expect to see you here this early. He didn't look up. Trying to catch up. Had a lot to learn. I arched a brow. Didn't think you'd last this long. Didn't think you'd let me, he muttered, scribbling something down. I stiffened. What's that supposed to mean? He finally looked at me. His expression was different. Less defensive. More tired. You think I don't see it, he said. The way you're waiting for me to screw up. The way you want me to fail? I scoffed. That's a stretch. No, it's not. He shook his head. You think I don't remember who I was? How I treated you? I crossed my arms, refusing to let my guard down. And now what? You suddenly feel bad? His jaw tightened. Yeah. I do. I blinked. I hadn't expected that. You don't have to believe me, he continued. Hell, I wouldn't if I were you. But I'm here. And I'm not leaving just because it's hard. I exhaled slowly. You're not leaving because you don't have any other options, I said coldly. Let's not pretend this is about some personal redemption arc. His gaze darkened. Maybe it started that way. But it's not why I'm still here. A long silence stretched between us. And for the first time, I didn't know what to say. Because what if he wasn't lying? What if he really had changed? And if that was true? What did that mean for me? That night, I sat in my office long after everyone left. I stared at my reflection in the window. For so long, I had held on to my anger. My resentment. It had fueled me. Driven me. But now, Ryan wasn't the person I had built up in my head. So if he wasn't the villain anymore, then what was I? And was I ready to let go of the grudge that had kept me going for so long? I spent years hating Ryan. Hating how easily life handed him everything. Hating how our parents worshipped him while I was treated like an afterthought. Hating how he had laughed when they cut me off, like I was some fool for trying to make something of myself. And now? Now, he was sitting in a cubicle, pulling late nights, proving, against all odds, that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the same person anymore. And that scared me. Because if he had changed, then maybe I wasn't as over the past as I thought. A few weeks later, I walked into the office and found my assistant waiting for me. She looked uncomfortable. We have a situation with Ryan. I sighed. What did he do? It's not what he did, she hesitated. It's what someone else did to him. That made me pause. She handed me a folder. His supervisor wrote him up. I frowned, flipping through the documents. The reasons? Ridiculous. Missed a comma in an email. Took too long to respond to a Slack message. Didn't CC the right person in a memo. I clenched my jaw. Ryan wasn't the problem. His supervisor was. I called the supervisor into my office. He sat down, looking smug. Look, I know he's your brother, but rules are rules. He's not fitting in. I tapped my fingers on the desk. You mean he's not fitting in, or you don't like that he used to be a big shot somewhere else? The guy shifted in his seat. He's not a team player. I smirked. Because he's working harder than you? Silence. I leaned forward. Let me be clear, I don't do favoritism. If Ryan was failing, I'd fire him myself. But I don't punish people for doing their damn jobs better than their boss. The supervisor paled. Ryan stays, I said, voice cold. You? We'll see. And just like that, the man who tried to humiliate my brother walked out with his head hanging low. I expected to feel satisfied. Instead, I felt something else. Protective. Because for the first time in our lives, Ryan had no one fighting for him. Except me. That night, Ryan knocked on my office door. You fired him, didn't you? He muttered. I shrugged. Not yet. But he's on thin ice. Ryan exhaled. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I said. I did. He studied me for a long moment. Why? I hesitated. Then, finally, because for once, someone had to have your back. Ryan's face shifted. Something between relief and regret. I never had yours, he admitted. I swallowed. No. You didn't. A beat of silence. Then, his voice quieter. I was a terrible brother. I let out a dry laugh. That's putting it lightly. He smiled, a real smile. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel forced. I had spent my whole life waiting for this moment, the moment Ryan would finally admit he had been wrong. And now that it was here, it didn't feel as good as I thought it would. Because instead of feeling victorious, I just felt free. Like maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to hate him anymore. Something shifted after that night. For the first time in our lives, Ryan and I weren't enemies. We weren't competing. We weren't playing the same old roles, him, the golden child. Me, the forgotten one. We were just two men trying to figure out what came next. And that scared me. Because if I didn't have my grudge anymore, who was I? A few weeks later, Ryan knocked on my office door. I glanced up. What? He hesitated. I got a job offer. My fingers froze over my keyboard. A job. Somewhere else. I swallowed, keeping my expression neutral. And? He let out a slow breath. It's a good offer. More money. Better position. It's a fresh start. I nodded. Sounds like a no-brainer. But something inside me twisted. Because for the first time, the idea of Ryan leaving again felt wrong. He studied me, eyes searching. I wouldn't have gotten this offer without you. I forced a smirk. You're welcome. Silence stretched between us. Then, quietly, I don't want to leave things unfinished here. I blinked. Ryan choosing to stay? Not because he had to. Because he wanted to. That was new. That was something I hadn't expected. That night, I sat in my office long after everyone left. Thinking. For years, all I had wanted was to beat Ryan. To prove I was better. Stronger. Smarter. Now, I had. But instead of celebrating, I just felt tired. Maybe it was time to stop fighting a war that was already over. So the next morning, I walked into Ryan's cubicle and tossed a folder onto his desk. He frowned, flipping it open. Then his eyes went wide. A promotion, he muttered. I smirked. You earned it. Ryan looked up at me, something unreadable in his face. Why? I shrugged. Because maybe, just maybe, I was wrong about you, too. A long pause. Then, a slow smile. Genuine. For the first time in our lives, we were finally brothers. For the first time in our lives, Ryan and I weren't standing on opposite sides. I wasn't the bitter, forgotten son. He wasn't the untouchable golden child. We were just two men trying to fix the damage we had spent years creating. And for the first time, I didn't hate him. I was in my office when my assistant knocked. You have visitors, she said, hesitating. Your parents. I tensed. They hadn't visited me once when I was struggling. Not when I was broke. Not when I was alone. But now that I was successful. Now they wanted a meeting. I took a slow breath. Send them in. My parents walked in like they owned the place. My mother smiled tightly. You look well, sweetheart. I just stared at her. Wish I could say the same. She cleared her throat. We heard about Ryan's promotion. Dad folded his arms. Seems like things have changed. I smirked. You could say that. Mom sighed. We were hoping we could put everything behind us. We're still family. That word. Family. I used to crave hearing that from them. Used to ache for their approval. But now? I just felt indifferent. I leaned back in my chair. Let me ask you something. They tensed. If I had failed, if my company had crashed and burned, would you be sitting here right now? Silence. I chuckled. Yeah. That's what I thought. Mom's face fell. Honey. Dad stiffened. We just want to make things right. I tilted my head. You mean, now that Ryan isn't your golden child anymore? Their expressions shattered. Because for the first time, they couldn't deny it. They had picked a side years ago. And now? I wasn't waiting for them to pick me back. I stood up, adjusting my watch. You were right about one thing. They looked up. You said I'd either come back to you, or I'd fail. I smirked. Turns out, I did neither. Then, before they could say another word, I walked out of my own office. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need their approval anymore. And that was the best victory of all.